I love pie because it's flaky and delicious and because it's so much fun to make. It's become a part of who I am, and hopefully one recipe or one crust, one dough might become a part of who you are too. There's a lot to love about pie, and it's not just the butter. I'm Erin Jeanne McDowell, and this is why I love pie. I've always wanted to tell the story of exactly how I fell so in love with pie. But in order to understand it, you really have to understand the relationship between my grandma and I, because that's really what the story's about. I think the easiest way is to break it down like you'd break down making a pie. There's the crust, the base of it all, how I grew up, the story of my grandma. There's the filling, how we came to be, and all the people who came before us. And then you don't make a pie unless you plan to share it with people, probably the people that you love. And that's sort of how I got to exactly where I am today. The first house I remember living in was this little green farmhouse outside of Big Springs, Kansas, which is an unincorporated, non-existent town. You only know it's Big Springs because of the water tower that says Big Springs. But I don't have a lot of memories of the house. I have a lot of memories of this barn and the silos because that's where we played. And even there was a summer camp here. My parents had a friend who was a teacher, and she would host a summer camp here that was called Camp Imagine. We had cubbies in the chicken coop in the barn, and we would play in the silos and in the woods. Hello, do you remember me? I remember you. We didn't live there very long. We moved out when I was in kindergarten, but that's where I feel like my story began, in that little house. When I was in kindergarten, we moved to my favorite place I've ever lived. This house near Lecompton, Kansas. You had to go down a long driveway, and at the base of the driveway was the house. And then there was another hill behind the house. My friends and I loved to roll down that hill, and there was this rope swing. We still talk about that kitchen in our whole family. This huge stovetop and this big island. And I loved to stand at that island. And I mean, I have photos of me and pie at that island. The thing that I remember the most is standing at this island. I would wait for my mom to go outside, and she'd be working on things outside. And then I would open up her spice drawer, which is right here. It's still a spice drawer. And she had a mortar and pestle. And I would grab the mortar and pestle and I would put it here, and I would pretend to shake out spices into the mortar and pestle and pretend to grind them. And I would talk to the window right there like I was hosting a cooking show. We didn't even want to leave that house, but it was very far from any near town. And as I grew older, I think my parents honestly got tired of chauffeuring me. I'd been in love with Lawrence my entire life, and we moved right into Old West Lawrence, which is very close to downtown, which is sort of the center of it all. And the main reason I remember and love that house is because that's the house where I really started learning to bake. At Easter time, my family does these peep celebrations with marshmallow peeps. And one year, my mom handed me 3 packs of stale peeps, and she said, go decorate the outside of the house with them. So I stuck the peeps to these pillars. Peep, 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 and I lined the sidewalk with them. And the first videos I ever made, we would make these videos about the peeps.
Oh my God! The mighty peep stakes his claim.
This is the peeps! The home of the peeps!
Home of the peeps!
Tell me about Grandma's house.
I grew up visiting my grandma at a very special place, just south of a tiny town called Overbrook, Kansas. The slogan of Overbrook is, "Don't overlook Overbrook." It would be easy to overlook Overbrook if you didn't know it was there. It was her home for most of my life, and when she was young, her grandma lived there, and she always thought of it as Grandma's house. Everyone who's been to this little house in Overbrook understands how special it is, but going back into it for the first time in, gosh, 13 or 14 years, I almost fell apart.
Over the river and through the woods to Grandma's house. It's pouring rain, but it feels really good to be home. At the original front door.
I mean, they haven't changed the cabinets. They still had my grandma's fridge. There used to be pictures of me on that fridge. Because of this house, I can actually track my family history in a quite detailed way, because that house was built in 1866 by my great-great-great-grandparents. It was an original homestead home on the Kansas prairie. The house has an actual, honest-to-goodness heartbeat. It's as big of a part of my family and my story as all the people who lived in it. And so many people aren't so lucky to have one place that is the family place that so many people before them have stepped in, have told stories in, have cooked and shared meals in.
When her great-great-grandma was here, she told me this window, and sometimes this one, but usually this one, because it's lower outside. There is a jar of cookies there, and I have the recipe, and I gave it to the family who lives here now. But it was always a jar full of these cookies. They were sugar cookies, but they had like a little bit of spice in them. And so that way kids could come by the window and take the cookies without having to come inside. They would just come over and take them out.
And not only did she pass along that recipe to me, but when I expressed so much interest in it, she opened up a drawer in the kitchen and she said, "Oh, this is the cookie cutter she used to make them." And I always keep that cookie cutter in my kitchen now, because it was one of the first sentimental things where I connected my family and baking kind of into this one beautiful thing. When my grandma was remodeling the house, she was taking down walls to kind of get to the base walls, which were just wooden planks. And they noticed that there was marks in the wood. It was my great-great-grandma. She had whitewashed the wood, and then she'd signed her name in the whitewash. And it said, Clara Coleman, whitewasher. She fixed the walls all around it, but she left that just as it is, and she put a frame around it and glass over it. Ah, that's so cool. I'm glad you kept it.
Thunder. Now that's what I happen to love rain. So maybe this is actually just like Grandma somewhere being like, hey, I know how much you love rain. I'll bring in a little storm for you.
My grandma, Jeanne McDowell, was incredibly smart, incredibly kind. She was a feminist in her time. She really believed in empowered women, a message that she very strongly passed on to me. She would always make sure I knew all of the wonderful, strong, powerful things that all the women who came before us had endured, had accomplished, the places they'd traveled, the places they'd been. She didn't love loud. She loved big, like you felt it, no matter what, from a distance, even when I lived apart from her through those years. She loved big. So Grandma's house was special to me all through my childhood, a place I loved to go. But it's also really the place that I started baking a lot of pie.
The first pie I ever remember making with my grandma, she needed to take it to some event in Overbrook in the neighborhood. She was using a recipe from a magazine, and it was for an olive oil crust. We did not like it. we immediately realized as we were making it, and then as it was baking, it didn't smell like butter. And we just thought, we gotta try this again. So the next weekend I went back and we made an apple pie again, and we used a different recipe. And we spent a lot more time making the dough that time. That olive oil dough hadn't been flaky, and we were both upset about that flakiness. So the obsession with flakes started extremely early on. So we had a thing here just like this, and this is where we'd make pies, right here. So we started making pies a lot when I would visit her, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was learning to test recipes in that kitchen because we kept making pies over and over again, and we realized that there were certain things that worked that weren't in the recipe. So before too long, I started leaving the butter in larger pieces, and it made the dough flakier. And eventually I realized that if you added more moisture than most recipes said, the dough is actually easier to work with. And I would chill it for longer, and then the crimps would come out crisper. And before long, I was making my entirely unique pie dough recipe. And that was one of the first recipes I ever wrote.
Grandma and I started baking the pies for Thanksgiving every year. And it was actually my favorite part of what has always been my favorite holiday. So the day before Thanksgiving, I would go over to my grandma's house and we'd mix all the pie dough first thing. And then while it was chilling, we'd prep some of the fillings. And, you know, we'd just spend the whole day together making sometimes 5 or 6 pies. She passed away in October. So the first Thanksgiving after her death hit me like a ton of bricks. The day before Thanksgiving, it was often just the two of us. And it was really wonderful grandma time. And so I was already missing her so much less than a month after her passing. But that day I just missed her presence in every way. I missed her hands, I missed the chatting and the, I don't know, even the pep talks if I started to think it wasn't going right. Because it felt like there was always a disaster where we were like, oh no, did we ruin all the pies? And she would always say to me that Julia Child said never to apologize. That was something she told me a lot, that if you do the cooking, you shouldn't say sorry. I wish I could rewind in time and go back to that kitchen with her and just see what it was like, because I hadn't figured it out yet. And she had no idea, but together we were working on something that was going to change the entire path of my life. You told me that when you were younger, you were really good at making pies.
I was. I was a star pie baker. And my mom's friends, they'd say, how'd you do it? And they would write it down. And I took pies everywhere. But then, slowly, after I gave birth to you, my pie skills started dwindling. And I believe there was a gene transfer. And you got all of them. You didn't save me any.
And you know, they say that. They say that when you have a boy, boys don't take anything from you while you're pregnant or when you birth them. But there's kind of an old wives' tale that girls take all your beauty.
Oh, well,
so
that
maybe
too.
I left you your beauty.
You took all my baking skills.
Well, not all
but
of them.
pie especially, because that was my specialty for many, many years.
Well, then really I have you to thank for all of this, huh?
Yes, you do.
Through the years, I've met a lot of people who have connections to food. I had recipe cards in their handwriting bequeathed to me. I had kitchen tools and equipment and techniques and stories. I had it all laid out for me, so it's easy to hold it close to my heart. I'm the youngest of 4 children, and all 3 of the older kids are brothers, so I was the first girl. And when they were naming me, they decided that they wanted to name me after my grandma. So that's why my name is Erin Jeanne McDowell. She saw my journey through pastry school, but she never saw my name in a magazine or newspaper. She never got to watch a video that I made. she never got to hold one of my books in her hands. And so I made kind of this conscious decision from the get-go that I wasn't just Erin McDowell when I was working. I was Erin Jeanne McDowell. I was gonna use my full name on anything I did as sort of an homage, a tribute to her.
We head into the kitchen with baker and food stylist Erin Jeanne McDowell.
I'm Erin Jeanne McDowell.
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 Erin Jeanne
McDowell.
Erin Jeanne McDowell, baker extraordinaire.
And in a way, that's what my grandma did for me, because she taught me not to be afraid to try new things. She encouraged experimentation and the use of creative thinking to just make something. And that's what I try to teach people to do now. I'm a big believer that there's not just one right way to do things. I think that if you understand how things work, you can go into the kitchen and find joy there. And that's what my grandma gave me. And she also showed me that once you've experienced that joy for yourself, it's time to share it with other people. You know, take a slice to a friend, take the whole pie to a neighbor while it's still piping hot. And part of the reason I wanted to teach people how to make pie better is because I thought, maybe if you didn't have a grandma who taught you, or maybe if you don't know how to bake or you don't feel confident in the kitchen, maybe I can teach you, and you might have a granddaughter someday, and you can teach her too. And it's like this train of sweetness that just started somewhere in the middle of nowhere where no one even wants to go. You know, don't overlook Overbrook, because you can plant a seed anywhere you are and it can grow into something bigger than you ever expected. She is baked into every slice of who I am. And now, thanks to pie, there are pieces of her everywhere. For all the people who think they don't like pie, sub in your favorite thing here. Sub in the memory of the first time you smelled a freshly baking loaf of bread. Sub in the time that you had a perfectly cooked steak. You know, whatever it is. Food is something that has an undeniable capability to bring people together, because it also nourishes us. It's something we have to have, but it's such a part of humanity that we make food into more than that. It's not just nourishment. You know, now it's an art form. Now it's a device for telling stories. Food is how I ended up learning where I came from, my family history. And it's part of why I feel so connected to the place that I'm from. So when I moved back here last year, I thought, it's finally time. It's time to tell the story. I'm Erin Jeanne McDowell, and this is why I love pie.